we think that GRRM has no criticism of Benioff and Weiss, or it's very, very weak. Well, that's not true, and this is an old one, so it's in the new book. But he aired this out before, but so we're just reiterating. He was very disappointed with what they did with Robert in the first season. He disagreed with them on a couple other things, but in terms of being public, this is the one he's been very detailed about. And they are sort of blame for this. I'm not going to defend them too much, but I will say that the problem here was the budget. Essentially what happened is, minor spoilers for book one as well as season one, Robert dies. We all know he dies, but the death is much more spectacular in the books. And George's angle is basically twofold. One, it wasn't logical. Basically, Robert is very isolated in the show. So he only has a few people when the critical scene happens. And his whole point is that doesn't make sense. He's a king. He's always going to have a retinue. He's always going to have tons of people with him. You can't be a king and be by yourself. That just doesn't make any sense. So the scene didn't have the gravitas or the sheer sense of spectacle or something big is happening that it's present in the book. But to be fair to Benioff and Weiss, basically just ran out of money. And he admits this, saying that, they screwed up the pilot. They didn't really have money for the other scenes and the rest of the episode, so they had to budget things. So he says he understands. He's done television. It's like, yeah, I get it. They just didn't have the cash. But he was very disappointed. It felt very lackluster. But there's another aspect which I think is much more critical and interesting, which is the storytelling aspect. Because, again, in terms of impactful deaths, I'm sure Robert is a fan favorite. A lot of people love him. But in terms of season one, I think most people would say Ned was way, way more interesting, way more impactful. But as you can see from George's angle, that's not true. He doesn't play favorites. For him, it was all part of one another in terms of the story, right? Robert's death, in a way, paves the way for Ned's death, and the two of them have to come together. Now, I know there's a lot of conspiracy theories here that George is just being nice, even when he's being publicly critical of Benioff and Weiss. See, I don't think so, because I'm going to put my own authority here as a writer. And again, mostly I've published in nonfiction, though I'm getting my fiction done and hopefully it'll get published as well. And it's always strange when you meet fans or an audience and you ask them what they're interested in the book or the fiction, or just speculative, saying, well, what do you think is important? But writers have a very, very different idea when they do it as well as when they publish it, saying, well, what did you think was important? And they go through it and they're like, why is that important? Because again, Robert, in the sense of a kingship, that's what they're fighting for in the Seven Kingdoms. It's not really just for power, but who can call themselves king? Who can call themselves the ruler of Westeros? And so just getting the psychology of what it means to rule people and why Robert thinks he has the right. He has the obvious power, right? There was the rebellion. He and Ned won. But as Ned says, he joined Robert for a reason. He just didn't do it for power. He honestly thought Robert had a right to resist. So whether or not we agree with that, there's a whole psychology and sociology as to why they're ruling the way they are. And again, it's not just him actually ruling, but declining. All of that has to fit together or the world doesn't make a lot of sense. So I actually believe George. I don't think he's lying. I don't think he's just saying stuff for the cameras. I think he's like, yeah, listen, it was all important to me. Constructing every character, every situation, it all matters. You look at the books, whatever you want to say about him, he's insanely meticulous. You will read passages over and over again, and maybe on the 10th time, you'll notice details that escaped you the 9 other times. He's that aside. I think ironically, that actually hurts the writing because he's so focused on the details that it's like, I think you want to, take a bigger look, and he says he's a gardener, but I disagree. I think there's very much an architectural mindset with George and his writing. And you can just see the sharp relief with Benioff and Weiss when they do their work. Something like X-Men Origins. It's like, there's not a gardener or an architect. It's just a crazy retarded kid with crayons just going berserk. And it's like, and you understand what they're trying to do when they do their twist and they do their kind of like spectacle, but it's just focused on effects. It's just focused on this very brute, crude, emotional response. Like, hey, she died. Wolverine is going to get angry and things like that. It's like, that's not the way it works. It's not about building up or expectations or all that stuff. It's like, why is he angry? Why does he care? And the answer is the writer has done a good enough job of constructing everything that you're like, oh, okay, so the reason Robert is obsessed with wine, the reason he's obsessed with this or that thing is because of this reason. It all fits together. And then when you see the show, to us, it's so obvious Cersei's trying to kill him. But it's not that obvious in the books. In the books, it's much more explicit that there's a conspiracy, but you can understand why Robert was taken off guard because he's distracted. So, and that comes across very well. Whereas in the show, it's kind of like, why didn't he see it coming? And the answer is because they're focused more on the superficial aspects, him screaming and things like that. And you don't notice certain things, like him just being so alcoholic all the time. Like, why is he drinking so much in the entries? He's just depressed. Now there's this revisionism. He's suicidal. He's not suicidal. He's just not happy in his situation. He's like, he should be happy, but he knows that he's hated by the Lannisters. He knows that people don't like him. He knows that he's not well loved by most people. So it's sort of like this tragic situation. And so it's sort of a sad death, but in a way, it's clearly for him, it's a release. It's like, finally, it's over. I don't have to worry about these things. And the show only communicates that weekly, not just in the lack of spectacle, but you're kind of like, okay, he's done. Let's move on to the next scene. And so I totally believe George when he's saying, like, yeah, I really, really worked to make sure that his death was impactful, and the show really didn't pick that up. So now, preview for some future stuff, because going off of that, as people may know, I'm a little critical of Mahler, and one of the things here is that it will shock people, but I will be doing some praise videos, because his criticisms of the last season, I do agree with mostly. In fact, I would say his review of episode 5 is genuinely funny. I recommend that highly. I just think with me and him, it's like he always keeps focusing on the superficial aspects of storytelling, and I want to look at more of the generally really deeper issues. And to me, it's not as bad as many other ways, but there's a similar mindset of focusing on the obvious things like the plot holes and things like that, where I think, especially with GRRM, you want to treat the material a little bit more sensitively. So his criticisms are fine. I actually agree with them. I still think he's a scumbag, but if he says 2 + 2 = 4, I'm not going to say he's wrong. It just seems to me that a lot of viewers as well as readers, they focus on the adventure and spectacle and don't realize, yeah, but all of that is a piece of the politics and philosophy. If you don't get one right, then the other one is not going to have the resonance it should. So I can see now that Cersei is not well constructed in the show, but that took a while for me to notice that, because again, there are so many things to focus on. It's like, oh yeah, they kind of screwed that up. But George, he really cares about that stuff all the way through. So I don't buy the conspiracy that he's just saying this for the cameras. I do really think for him, it's all important. He's not favoring one over the other. And he's always thinking about how does each and every little moment work towards the bigger story. All right, this has been GRRM and Thrones Analyzed on George's complaints about season 1. Believe it or not, that's what he found annoying. I'm sure we could give him a big list of other things he should find annoying, but, it's a very writer mindset. I can only speak as a writer myself that, yeah, it's kind of weird what writers care about or obsess about, but, that's what makes them writers. That's all I can say. All right, have a good day. Please comment below. Please like and subscribe, and please consider supporting the work on Patreon. Have a good day.